The hands that feed us are vanishing. Under the soft hum of supermarket lights, we live surrounded by abundance. Fruit in winter, bread without effort, milk without thought. But behind that quiet convenience lies a vanishing world of people, of soil, of stories. Across the backroads of America, barns are collapsing into themselves. The fields are still green, but they belong to no one. Cows graze without the laughter of children. The mailboxes stand empty. What happens when the most important people in the world, those who feed every nation, simply disappear? What happens when an economy built on growth begins to consume the very roots that sustain it? This is not a story about famine. It's a story about forgetting. A slow, silent exodus, one that began decades ago, hidden behind progress and profit margins. If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe to Beyond Origins, and let's uncover how the world truly came to be. It's the year 2025. America's farmland stretches wider than the human eye can see, and yet fewer people than ever are there to tend it. The vanishing heartland. The American Midwest was once the empire of the plow, a place where faith, soil, and sweat defined a nation. But today, silence echoes where tractors once roared. Entire counties have lost half their population. Ghost towns with golden fields, the bread baskets of the world hollowing from within. Drive through Nebraska, Kansas, or Iowa, and you'll see it, the quiet tragedy hidden behind postcard beauty. Rows of corn still sway in the wind, silos still rise against the horizon, and the roads still cut perfectly straight through endless plains. But stop for a moment, step out, and listen. There's no laughter, no children, no dogs barking in the distance, just the whisper of wind through rusted grain bins and the hum of a pickup that hasn't moved in weeks. These were once the most vibrant lands in America towns, built on Saturday markets, church bells, and harvest festivals. Families who measured time not in hours, but in seasons. The soil was their bank, their faith, their memory. But over the last half-century, something began to break. The numbers tell part of the story. In 1950, there were nearly 7 million farms in the United States. Today, there are fewer than 2 million. In states like Iowa, the average farm has tripled in size, but the number of people working the land has fallen by more than 70. The result is a strange paradox. More food than ever, but fewer farmers than ever to grow it. Each generation watched another neighbor leave. First came the farm crisis of the 1980s, a tidal wave of debt and foreclosures that turned auctions into community funerals. Families who had survived the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression lost everything to interest rates and collapsing prices. Then came the 2000s, when even the survivors realized that no matter how hard they worked, they couldn't outbid corporations, outlast global trade, or outscale machines. The decay wasn't loud. It was slow, polite, and bureaucratic. A signature on a bank loan. A for sale sign on the edge of a field. A son who never came back after college. One by one, the lights of rural America dimmed not from disaster, but from neglect. The landscape itself bears the scars. Schools closed, merged, or turned into storage buildings. Hospitals consolidated, forcing residents to drive hours for care. Grain elevators became ghost monuments, towering above towns that no longer had a reason to exist. Even the churches, once the anchors of these communities, now stand empty, their steeples pointing toward a heaven fewer people believe in. And yet, the land remains beautiful, heartbreakingly so. Fields roll out like golden oceans beneath skies too wide to comprehend. Old barns tilt in the wind, their paint peeling, but their dignity intact. The few who remain cling to the soil with quiet defiance, refusing to let their grandparents' sweat be reduced to statistics. But even they know the truth. The heartland is dying not because it is poor, but because it's so efficient. Technology replaced people. Corporations replaced neighbors. Global markets replaced local loyalty. The very success of American agriculture, its capacity to feed the world, became the seed of its own extinction. There is irony in that. The same fields that once symbolized abundance now symbolize absence. The world still eats from the Heartland S bounty, but few remember the hands that harvest it. The Midwest became invisible by becoming indispensable, a machine so productive it erased the human story behind its power. Drive long enough, and you will see what S left. A child's S bicycle rusting in front of an empty farmhouse. A mailbox with a faded family name. A small-town cafe open only on weekends where farmers sit in silence talking about weather patterns and ethanol prices. There's no anger, just fatigue, the kind that settles deep into the bones after decades of doing everything right and still losing ground. This is the vanishing heartland, a place where America's soul once lived. It isn't gone overnight. It sits fading with every passing harvest, every sold acre, every shuttered school. You want to see it on the news? You will feel it if you ever stop long enough to listen to the wind moving through the fields. And still, the land endures ancient, patient, waiting for someone to remember that it was never just dirt, it was home, a nation built on dirt. In the 1800s, America's strength wasn't in its cities, it was in its soil. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave land to anyone willing to farm it, turning millions of immigrants into landowners overnight. This promise of 40 acres and a dream forged the backbone of the Republic. But the dream, like the soil, is thinning. It began as a great experiment, a vision of democracy rooted not in marble halls, but in muddy boots. The government offered free land to anyone brave enough to tame it. 160 acres carved from the vast wilderness of the West. Men, women, and children packed wagons, left factories, and crossed plains in search of a new beginning. Each sunrise on the prairie was a declaration of faith not in God, but in the land itself. To farm was to belong. A man's worth was measured not by wealth, but by what his hands could coax from the earth. Work hard, the nation promised, and the land will reward you. And for a while it did. The soil was generous, the rains steady, and the markets hungry. Families built homes from sod, schools from timber, and towns from courage. The Homestead Act didn't just populate the frontier, it created the American identity. Independence, perseverance, faith and effort over privilege. The image of the farmer, sun-worn, steadfast, and free, became the moral center of a young nation. Politicians spoke of the yeoman farmer as the ideal citizen, self-reliant, honest, humble, yet fiercely proud. The Republic's virtue, they believed, flowed from his plow. But beneath this golden myth lay an untold cost. The land that seemed empty was already home to countless indigenous nations whose histories were plowed under the promise of progress. The Homestead Act wasn't just a story of opportunity, it was a story of displacement. The soil that built America's prosperity was soaked in older stories that the new owners chose not to remember. Still, the dream took root. By the turn of the century, the United States had transformed from a patchwork of colonies into an agricultural empire. Wheat from Kansas fed Europe. Cotton from the South powered English mills. Corn, cattle, and timber built fortunes that stretched from prairie barns to Wall Street towers. The nation was young, rich, and seemingly endless, but the dirt was never infinite. The first settlers farmed with reverence, rotating crops, letting land rest, trusting nature set the rhythm. Their children, driven by market demand and mechanization, broke that rhythm. Steel plows dug deeper. Tractors turned more soil than the wind could hold. By the 1930s, the Great Plains, once called the Garden of Eden, began to turn to dust. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a weather event. It was the Land S Rebellion. Decades of overfarming stripped the prairie bare. Winds lifted the soil into the sky, blotting out the sun for days. Families fled their homes, not from war, but from their own success. We aimed to grow, one farmer wrote, and grew ourselves out of a future. After the dust settled, America rebuilt with science, subsidies, and scale. Farming became more efficient, but less human. The family homesteads of the 1800s turned into agribusinesses by the 1900s. What began as a moral ideal, every man master of his land, became a corporate strategy, every acre measured by yield per dollar. And yet, even now, the myth endures. Politicians still invoke the farmer as the nation's soul. Advertisements show golden fields and calloused hands. We love the image of the dirt, we just no longer live by it. The land that once gave Americans their freedom now demands permission from banks, corporations, and algorithms. The nation was built on dirt, fertile, forgiving, and full of promise. But soil, like democracy, must be cared for. When neglected, it erodes. When overworked, it dies. The pioneers believed the land would last forever. They were right and wrong. The dirt remains, but the bond between it and the people who once trusted it is fading into dust. And still, the myth stands tall, a monument of memory in a land that forgot how it was born. The machine arrives. When tractors replaced horses, yields soared, but something human began to fade. The sound of iron wheels was the first whisper of automation. Every new machine promised freedom, yet demanded scale. Small farms couldn't keep up. The seeds of consolidation were already sown. The 20th century dawned with smoke and steel. Across the plains, the horizon shimmered, not with sunlight on crops, but with the glint of metal plows, threshers, harvesters. Machines that could do in hours what once took families days. It was intoxicating. Farmers called it the Age of Miracles. For the first time, man could command the land like an army, efficient, tireless, obedient. But with every revolution comes a trade. The machine gave speed, but it also gave debt. A new tractor could cost more than a year's harvest, and soon, ownership itself became a gamble. To afford the latest technologies, farmers borrowed against their future. And to repay it, they had to plant more, buy more, risk more. The logic was simple: grow or die. By the 1920s, America as a countryside was roaring. Wheat and corn poured from the fields in record numbers. Prices rose. Banks lent freely. Mechanization seemed unstoppable, the great equalizer between labor and profit. The horse, once a symbol of rural power, was suddenly obsolete. A century-old bond between man and animal was severed in a single decade. Yet the new world of machines had an invisible cost. Farms expanded, but families contracted. What once took a team of neighbors now took a single man and a motor. The shared harvests, those communal rituals that bound towns together, began to vanish. Progress, it turned out, was a lonely business. Then came the crash. In 1929, the same banks that financed the mechanized boom began to crumble. Crop prices collapsed by 60. Farmers who had mortgaged their land to buy machines suddenly owed more than their fields were worth. The same tractors that once promised liberation now sat idle, rusting under a sky darkened by dust. The Dust Bowl wasn't born of drought alone, it was born of hubris. Deep plowing by powerful new machines tore through native grasses that had anchored the prairie for millennia. When the winds came, there was nothing to hold the earth down. Millions of acres turned to airborne ash. Towns disappeared beneath it. Families fled west, their tractors abandoned like tombstones of ambition. And yet, after every collapse, the machine returned stronger, smarter, bigger. After World War II, a new wave of innovation swept across the heartland. combines that harvested acres an hour, gas engines that never tired, chemical fertilizers that made the land bloom like never before. To many, it felt like redemption. To others, it felt like surrender. The farm no longer a living thing, but a factory. The human cost deepened. As efficiency grew, labor shrank. By 1950, half of America's rural workforce had vanished. Sons left for cities, chasing factory wages that were steadier than weather. Daughters who once helped tend livestock found new lives in offices and schools. The land was still productive more than ever, but its heartbeat had changed. There is a cruel irony in progress. The more power we give ourselves, the more we give away. Farmers became dependent on the very machines meant to free them. A breakdown during harvest could mean ruin. A change in fuel prices could decide whether a family ate or starved. The tractor had replaced the horse, but the horse had never charged interest. Still, the myth of progress endured. Advertisements showed smiling men atop gleaming engines, conquering nature with horsepower and grit. No one talked about the debt, the isolation, or the quiet despair of those left behind by the next upgrade. The machine didn't just transform farming, it transformed the farmer, turning him from steward to operator, from caretaker to mechanic. The fields grew wider, the skies emptier, the labor fewer. What began as a revolution of convenience became a silent conquest, the victory of metal over muscle, speed over soul. And still, the machine rolls on. Each generation believes it as the last to need human hands, that this time the system will balance. But in the hum of every combine, you can still hear the faint echo of that first mechanical whisper, the moment progress began to trade humanity for horsepower. The Green Revolution's shadow, mid-20th century. Fertilizers, chemicals, and hybrid crops transformed hunger into surplus. Scientists called it the Green Revolution, but the cost was silent debt, dependence, and degraded soil. Farmers became chemists, businessmen, and gamblers, betting their future on Monsanto and rain. The Green Revolution began as a miracle. After 2 world wars and a looming population boom, humanity faced a terrifying question. Could the Earth feed itself? Then, from the laboratories of Mexico, India, and the American Midwest came the answer yes. With new seeds, new science, and new faith in technology, man could outgrow hunger itself. The revolution had a prophet, Norman Borlaug, an Iowa-born scientist who bred a strain of wheat that yielded more grain, grew faster, and resisted disease. His discovery won him the Nobel Peace Prize and was credited with saving over 1 billion lives. To the world, he was a savior. To farmers, he was the herald of a new age. But revolutions never come free. Behind the miracles of abundance were unseen consequences, not immediate, but inevitable. The old rhythm of farming, guided by weather and instinct, was replaced by the cold precision of chemistry. Fields, once nurtured with manure and rotation, were now fed with nitrogen and phosphates. The soil no longer breathed, it was engineered. In the 1950s and 60s, American farms transformed into laboratories. Tractors became mobile chemistry sets. Farmers were taught to think in formulas: pounds of nitrogen per acre, gallons of herbicide per field. Hybrid seeds, designed for maximum yield, could not reproduce naturally. So each year, the farmer returned to buy again new seed, new fertilizer, new promise. The ancient covenant between man and land was quietly rewritten into a contract. For a while, it worked beautifully. Wheat yields doubled. Cornfields stretched farther than the eye could see. The supermarkets overflowed. For the first time in history, famine seemed like an outdated concept. Progress had triumphed. But beneath the surface, the soil was starving. The same fertilizers that fed crops stripped the ground of its natural balance. Pesticides killed not only pests, but pollinators. water tables sank. Rivers ran thick with runoff, feeding toxic blooms downstream. The Midwest, once a living ecosystem, was becoming an engineered one, efficient, lifeless, and fragile. And the farmers themselves, the supposed victors of this agricultural revolution, were caught in a trap. Each year, the cost of production climbed higher. Each year, the prices of crops fluctuated wildly. To survive, they had to grow more, borrow more, and rely more on the corporations selling them the tools of salvation. It was a treadmill disguised as progress. Companies like Monsanto, DuPont, and Cargill built empires from this dependence. They controlled the seeds, the chemicals, and eventually the data. Farmers who once traded advice over fences now found themselves bound by patents and lawsuits. The age-old phrase, saving seed, once an act of stewardship, became an act of infringement. The Green Revolution had fed the world, but it had also privatized the very act of feeding. The miracle became a monopoly. Meanwhile, the human toll deepened. The new methods demanded scale thousands of acres to stay profitable. Small farms, unable to compete, vanished by the tens of thousands. Communities hollowed out as corporate farms expanded. The children of farmers saw their parents work harder than ever, for less than ever. And so, they left. The irony is almost biblical. In the pursuit of abundance, the farmers created scarcity not of food, but of meaning. The work became mechanical. The seasons became transactions. The soil, once alive with memory, became a medium for inputs and outputs. By the end of the 20th century, America's fields produced more grain than ever before, but they also produced something else, an illusion of security. The system could no longer sustain itself without chemicals, debt, and constant reinvention. The harvests grew, but the roots, ecological, financial, and human, grew weaker. Today, scientists warn that nearly 1/3 of the world's farmland is degraded. The land can still grow food, but not life. And the farmers, caught in the middle of progress and survival, continue to play the same deadly game, betting on the next season, the next chemical, the next promise. The Green Revolution was supposed to end hunger. Instead, it began a quiet dependence not on nature, but on man's illusion of control. And still, every spring the tractors roll out again, humming with faith in science and fear of failure. Because for the modern farmer, there is no turning back. The soil has changed, and so have we. The corporate plow. By the 1980s, farming wasn't a way of life, it was a business war. Agribusinesses bought the land, the seeds, and the market. The farmer became a subcontractor on his own soil. The handshake replaced by a contract. Independence replaced by yield targets. It did not happen overnight. It began, as most revolutions do, with paperwork. Small clauses buried in seed agreements. New government policies favoring efficiency. Bank loans that rewarded expansion, not stability. By the time anyone realized what had changed, it was too late. The American farmer had become an employee in a system that no longer needed him to own anything but debt. In the 1980s, the Midwest looked prosperous from a distance. Combines crawled across endless fields. Grain towers pierced the horizon like cathedrals to productivity. But behind the illusion of abundance was desperation. Global grain prices had collapsed after years of overproduction. Interest rates soared. Land values plummeted. Thousands of farmers who had borrowed to modernize to compete suddenly found themselves bankrupt. The auction became the new town gathering. Neighbors stood in the cold as families sold everything. Tractors, land, even furniture to pay back banks that no longer cared about names, only numbers. One reporter at the time called it the Great Depression of the countryside, but this one didn't make front-page headlines. It was too quiet, too rural, too far away from the centers of power. When the dust settled, the survivors weren't the farmers, they were the corporations. companies with deep pockets bought up foreclosed land for pennies on the dollar. Fertilizer giants and seed manufacturers expanded their reach, and where the farmer once made decisions based on instinct, now algorithms and boardrooms dictated every move. By the mid-1980s, Cargill, ADM, and Monsanto were indeed just selling products, they were controlling entire ecosystems. From seed to supermarket shelf, they built a system of vertical integration that left farmers with only one role: to produce endlessly at any cost. They owned the seeds, they owned the chemicals, they owned the buyers, the farmer owned the risk. Contracts replaced freedom. A chicken farmer in Arkansas, a soybean grower in Iowa, a dairy operator in Wisconsin all faced the same invisible leash. The terms dictated what they planted, how they fed, when they harvested, even what machinery they could use. The corporate logo became the new flag of the American countryside. The irony was sharp. For a century, the farmer had been the symbol of self-reliance, the face on political posters, the heart of patriotic songs. Now, that same farmer was told what to grow, when to ship it, and how to price it, often at a loss. The old slogan, "Feed the world," had turned into "Meet the quota." To the companies, it was progress, a streamlined, globalized food system that could feed billions. To the farmers, it was colonization by paperwork. Some adapted, investing in scale and efficiency, building massive operations indistinguishable from factories. Others walked away, unable to bear the humiliation of asking for permission to plant on land their grandparents had cleared by hand. The psychological toll was immense. Pride turned to exhaustion. The barn, once a symbol of family and endurance, became a financial liability. Marriages strained, mental health collapsed. The quiet dignity that had once defined rural America eroded under the constant pressure of corporate precision. And yet, consumers never noticed. The grocery stores stayed full, prices stayed low, and the marketing stayed comforting: rolling fields, family names, sunlight on golden wheat. But behind every smiling farmer in an advertisement was a contract that said otherwise. By the end of the century, 4 corporations controlled over 80 of the American beef market. Similar monopolies emerged in seeds, grains, and fertilizers. The open marketplace that once defined American agriculture had become a corporate monarchy, efficient, powerful, and unyielding. Farmers were no longer independent entrepreneurs. They were the middlemen in someone else's empire. The same men who once fought to own a few acres of dirt now found themselves trapped between global commodity markets and multinational balance sheets. And yet, through it all, the old instinct remained to keep going, to plant again next spring, to believe that somehow next year will be different. The corporate plow doesn't cut through the soil, it cuts through people, through traditions, communities, and generations. It tills not for life, but for margin. And still, the fields stay green, fed by a system that calls it progress, while quietly burying the very people who made it possible. The debt-trapped banks encouraged expansion, bigger tractors, more acres, loans upon loans. But when prices fell, debt crushed entire families. Between 1980 and 1986, nearly a quarter of American farms vanished. Auctions became funerals. Neighbors watching neighbors lose generations of heritage. It started, as most tragedies do, with optimism. The 1970s were a golden age for American farmers. Grain prices were high, exports were booming. The Soviet Union, desperate for food, was buying American wheat in record quantities. The government urged farmers to plant fence row to fence row, to expand production and feed the world. Banks echoed the call, offering easy loans, low interest, and the promise that prosperity would last forever. And so, farmers did what they'd always done when told the future was bright. They bet everything on it. They bought land, they bought bigger tractors, larger combines, better irrigation. Expansion wasn't greed, it was survival. In a world racing towards scale, standing still meant dying. but the world changed faster than they could. In the early 1980s, a perfect storm hit. Grain prices collapsed, oil prices spiked, and interest rates once hovering around 7 soared to over 20. Overnight, the same banks that had begged farmers to borrow began calling in their loans. Debt, invisible in the good years, became a weapon. Families who had farmed the same land for generations suddenly faced foreclosure notices from men they had gone to church with. Banks, that once sent Christmas cards, now sent deputies. The machinery that had symbolized success, the chrome tractors, the massive combines, became anchors pulling entire families underwater. In small towns across the Midwest, auctioneers became undertakers of the American dream. Crowds gathered in silence as a man-s life was sold piece by piece: a plow, a milk cow, a wedding ring. Children watched as their parents tried to buy back their own tools. The air at those sales was heavy, not with anger, but disbelief. The pain was indeed just financial, it was existential. Farmers didn't see debt as a business risk, they saw it as moral failure. Losing the land wasn't just bankruptcy, it was a kind of death. "If I lose this farm," one Iowa farmer told a reporter in 1984, "I lose who I am." For many, that loss was unbearable. Tragically, suicide rates among farmers doubled during these years. Behind every statistic was a familiar story. A good man who had done everything right, who had worked dawn to dusk, who had trusted the system and found it had no mercy. Families would find notes written on loan papers or hear a single gunshot echo across empty fields. The newspapers called it the quiet crisis. But in rural America, it was deafening. Politicians noticed too late. Hearings were held, bailouts were discussed, but the damage had already been done. By 1986, nearly 300,000 farms were gone. Entire counties in Iowa and Nebraska were hollowed out, schools closed, churches emptied, the land stayed, but the people disappeared. The irony was bitter. The government had told farmers to get big or get out, and when they did, the system made sure both happened. The survivors, the ones who managed to hold on, emerged changed. They were harder, quieter, more cautious. The old neighborly trust gave way to private anxiety. In the decades that followed, those who remained learned to live with a new kind of fear, not of drought or pests, but of paperwork. The bank became the new weather, and debt the new drought. Every signature carried the weight of another gamble, another season of risk, and still, they kept planting, because to stop would mean admitting defeat. The debt trap wasn't just economic, it was psychological. It chained hope to obligation. The harder farmers worked to escape it, the deeper they sank. By the time the crisis faded from headlines, the American countryside had been permanently altered. Small family farms gave way to large operations, often backed by investors who had never set foot in a field. The culture of independence that had once defined rural America was quietly replaced by one of compliance contracts, subsidies, and caution. But somewhere in those fields, among the ghosts of lost farms, there was still a kind of resilience, a refusal to surrender entirely. The debt trap took the land from many, but it didn't take the spirit from all. And yet, the lesson remains unlearned. Every generation of farmers is told the same thing: expand, borrow, trust the market, and every generation learns too late that the market doesn't return loyalty. It only rewards leverage. In the end, the soil remembers what the banks forget, that growth without balance always collapses. And when it does, it is not just the crops that die, it says the people who believed they could never fall. The suicide fields. There is a haunting truth behind the statistics. Farmers die by suicide at rates twice the national average. Isolation, financial ruin, and identity loss create a quiet epidemic. The land that once gave life now breaks it, and nobody talks about it. To most Americans, the image of the farmer is timeless, strong, stoic, enduring. A man or woman in the fields at sunrise, working with quiet dignity. But behind that image, hidden beneath the noise of tractors and the glow of grain silos, lies a silence that's become unbearable. In barns and tool sheds across rural America, too many have decided that the fight is over. The crisis didn't erupt overnight. It crept in, decade by decade, as the economic pressure on farmers tightened like a vice. The 1980s farm crisis broke more than bank accounts. It broke identities. Families who had weathered droughts, plagues, and wars couldn't survive interest rates and foreclosure notices. But the wounds never healed, they passed on quietly to the next generation. In the early morning hours, before the sun hits the fields, there is a particular kind of silence. You can hear the wind move through the grain, the creak of a barn door, the slow exhale of an animal waking. For many farmers, it is the most dangerous part of the day, the moment when yesterday's burdens feel heavier than tomorrow's hope. Rural suicide rarely makes headlines. It is too scattered, too personal, too far from the cities that count. But talk to the people who live there, and you will hear the same stories. A neighbor found in the shed, a man who went out to check the fence and never came back, a woman who couldn't see a way through another harvest of debt. The obituaries use quiet language: died suddenly, passed unexpectedly, but everyone knows. Everyone knows. Farming, more than any other profession, ties identity to purpose. It is not just a job, it's a life philosophy. The farmer is not someone who does, he is. His worth is measured in yield, in endurance, in how much he can take before he breaks. And that's the cruel paradox. The very strength that defines farmers also isolates them. They don't ask for help. They don't talk about weakness, because in their world, to admit despair is to fail. The land and failure is unthinkable. Add to that the crushing economics. Modern farming requires enormous capital machines that cost hundreds of thousands, chemicals that must be bought every season, and contracts that can vanish overnight. Prices fluctuate based on forces no farmer can control. Trade wars, fuel costs, droughts on the other side of the world. When you depend on nature, debt, and corporate buyers all at once, control becomes an illusion. And when control goes, so does hope. Then, there was the isolation. The nearest neighbor may live miles away. The local cafe closed years ago. The church congregation has thinned to a handful of elderly faces. For many, the smartphone is the only lifeline to the outside world, and even that brings reminders of failure, stories of success, of cities thriving while their towns fade into irrelevance. Mental health services in rural areas are almost non-existent. Clinics are far, and therapists few. The cultural stigma remains high. In communities where pride is survival, vulnerability is still a foreign language. We'd done to talk about that stuff out here, one farmer in Kansas said. You just keep working, until you can tea. Some states have begun to take notice. Hotlines for agricultural workers, peer support networks, even barn meetings, where farmers can talk openly without judgment. But the help often arrives too late, and too little. Because the problem isn't just financial, it's existential. What do you do when your purpose, your heritage, and your identity all collapse at once? Every farm that vanishes leaves a hole not only in the economy, but in the human fabric of the countryside. Behind each closed gate, each rusted mailbox lies a story of endurance turned to exhaustion. The land itself feels heavier, as if mourning the people who once loved it. And yet, amid the despair, there are still glimmers of resilience. Support groups where farmers finally say out loud what they've held in for decades. Younger generations who speak openly about mental health. Communities rediscovering what their grandparents once knew, that survival isn't about toughness, but about connection. The suicide fields are not just about death. They are about what happens when an entire way of life forgets how to ask for help when and silence becomes tradition. And still, every dawn, the tractors start again, because even in the depths of despair, the farmer's instinct remains to get up, to work, to believe that the next season might be kinder. But as long as silence remains the loudest sound in the countryside, the cost of feeding the world will continue to be measured not only in bushels, but in lives. The price of abundance. We live in the cheapest food era in human history, but someone pays the difference. Cheap milk means bankrupt dairies. Discount beef means exhausted ranchers. Supermarkets celebrate low prices while farmers bleed through their balance sheets. The modern grocery store is a miracle of logistics and illusion. Under fluorescent lights, endless aisles overflow with choice oranges in winter, salmon in the desert, strawberries in February. Each label boasts of freshness and abundance. But somewhere, far from the air-conditioned hum, someone is paying for that miracle in sweat, debt, and despair. The truth is uncomfortable. Food has never been cheaper for the consumer and never more expensive for the producer. Since the 1970s, the share of every food dollar that reaches the farmer has fallen from over 40 to less than 15. That means for every dollar you spend on a loaf of bread, the person who grew the wheat might earn only a few cents. The rest is swallowed by packaging, marketing, transport, and profit margins for the corporations that stand between soil and shelf. The system didn't break overnight. It was designed this way, a quiet trade between politicians, corporations, and consumers. In the 1970s, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz famously told farmers to get big or get out. His vision was simple: produce more, sell it cheaper, and dominate global markets. The result was an industrial food system optimized for efficiency, not humanity. And so, farmers obeyed. They planted fence row to fence row, chasing yields to stay afloat. But every record harvest drove prices lower. They were trapped in a paradox of abundance. The more they produced, the less they earned. The market rewarded excess with poverty. Meanwhile, consumers learned to expect cheap food as a birthright: a gallon of milk for less than a bottle of water, a chicken for the price of a cup of coffee. We stopped asking how it was possible or who was crushed to make it so. Behind the curtain, the casualties piled up. Small dairies shuttered as milk processors consolidated. Ranchers sold off herds when feed costs outpaced market prices. Poultry farmers, bound by contracts with megacorporations, found themselves living in quiet servitude, producing efficiently but earning less than minimum wage after expenses. The economic violence was subtle, sanitized by distance. The city dweller saw only discounts, not despair. Supermarkets became temples of consumer power, where low prices were treated as moral victories, proof of a thriving economy. But every bargain came from somewhere: from a farmer forced to sell below cost, from a community losing its main employer, from a river poisoned by runoff. Corporations perfected the art of control. They dictated the terms of production, prices, and even genetics, engineering crops and livestock for shelf stability, not nutrition. Marketing departments sold nostalgia: farm fresh, locally grown, all natural. But the farms behind the packaging often belonged to conglomerates whose CEOs had never touched soil. Even subsidies once meant to protect family farms became tools for perpetuating this imbalance. Billions in government payments flowed each year, but most went to the largest producers, not the struggling smallholders. It was the illusion of support keeping the machine running just enough to prevent collapse, never enough to restore fairness. And yet, the farmers endure, because walking away means more than financial ruin, it means losing identity. They take second jobs, delay repairs, skip vacations, and pray for rain. They feed millions, yet sometimes can't afford their own groceries. We grow the food, one farmer told a reporter, but the system eats us first. The irony cuts deep. Abundance was supposed to liberate humanity from hunger. Instead, it has enslaved those who produce it. We have built a civilization that treats food as a commodity, not a covenant, and in doing so, we've forgotten that someone still has to grow it. So next time you hold a tomato in January or buy a steak for half its worth, remember this: cheap is never free. It's paid for in silent bankruptcies, sleepless nights, and land mortgaged for another season of survival. The price of abundance is invisible to most of us, hidden behind slogans and packaging. But in the countryside, the bill comes due every day, and still, the farmers rise before dawn, pull on their boots, and head into the fields. Because despite everything, the land still answers to their hands. They feed the world, even as the world forgets to feed them. The disappearing farmer. The average American farmer today is nearly 60 years old. In 2 decades, half of them will retire, and few will replace them. The next generation has left for cities, screens, and salaries. In rural schools, the children of farmers are rarer than ever. Across the quiet plains of Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, a generational clock is running out. You can see it in the weathered faces at the co-op, in the slow pace of auctions, in the empty desks at rural schools. Farming, once the inheritance of sons and daughters, is becoming a profession without heirs. The numbers are stark. In 1950, there were more than 6 million farmers in America. Today, there are fewer than 2 million, and their average age climbs each year. Nearly 70 of U.S. farmland is now owned by people over 55. And when they retire, there is no one waiting to take the keys to the tractor. The exodus didn't happen by chance, it was engineered by economics. Decades of consolidation, automation, and corporate control have stripped farming of stability and dignity. The next generation saw their parents break their backs for shrinking returns, living at the mercy of weather, banks, and commodity markets. They grew up watching stress lines deepen across the dinner table, hearing the quiet dread when milk prices fell or rain came too late. So when the time came to choose, they chose differently. Today, the children of farmers become engineers, software developers, nurses, anything but farmers. They chase predictable paychecks and urban opportunity not because they stopped loving the land, but because the land stopped loving them back. The rural dream that once meant independence now means isolation. Visit any small-town high school and you'll see the evidence. The future farmers of America. Chapter once the pride of rural education now struggles to fill its roster. In some districts, there are more students learning coding than crop rotation. Teachers quietly admit that few, if any, plan to stay. The farms that surround the town are just scenery now, not destiny. For the aging farmers still working, the question of succession haunts every season. Some hope a grandchild might return someday. Others look to neighbors or lease to corporations. Many simply work until they can tea. You don't retire from farming, one 72-year-old farmer said. You just slow down until the ground takes you. And that's the quiet tragedy when these farmers go. They take more than their land. They take knowledge built over lifetimes. When to plant by instinct, how to read the clouds, where the soil changes texture beneath your boots. You can teach that in a spreadsheet or an algorithm. It's a wisdom that dies with the hands that held it. As the countryside empties, its identity fractures. Main streets fade, schools consolidate, churches merge. The small-town economy, once driven by the rhythm of planting and harvest struggles to find purpose without its farmers. And so, the disappearance spreads outward like ripples from a stone, touching everything from local diners to rural hospitals. Corporate buyers are quick to fill the vacuum. Investment firms, pension funds, and foreign interests now purchase farmland as stable assets, not as living legacies. The field, once passed from father to son, now changes hands with the click of a mouse. Ownership becomes abstract, another line in a balance sheet. In the process, the farmer becomes invisible. He no longer represents the rugged individualist of American mythology, but a fading relic respected but irrelevant. He appears in campaign speeches, in commercials for pickup trucks, in nostalgic documentaries about the heartland, but not in policy or power. His image is everywhere, his influence nowhere, and yet, for those who remain, there is still a quiet pride. They know they were the last of something sacred, a living link between the old world and the new. Each dawn, they rise not for profit, but for purpose. They understand the fragility of what they hold, not just the land, but the meaning of it. But time is relentless. Every year more tractors sit idle, more mailboxes go unpainted, more fields are leased instead of loved. The land endures, but the bond between people and place is fraying. The farmer, once the symbol of America's endurance, is disappearing not with anger, but with exhaustion. The question now isn't just who will farm the land, but who will remember what it meant. Because when the last farmer locks his barn, it won't just be the end of a career. It will be the end of a chapter in the story of civilization, the closing of a bond between humanity and the earth that fed it. And still, as the sun rises over an empty field, a few silhouettes remain bent, stubborn, and unyielding, the last keepers of a vanishing world, still tending the soil even as it forgets their names. The children who never came back. In the mid-20th century, a single farm might raise 5 kids, all learning the trade. Now, the same land raises one child who swears never to return. The work is endless, the pay uncertain, the isolation unbearable. The land remains, but not the lineage. Once, the farm was a classroom not of books, but of endurance. Children learned to drive tractors before they could drive cars. They gathered eggs before sunrise, baled hay in the July heat, and listened to their parents talk about rain like it was a relative. It wasn't just work, it was initiation, a way of inheriting the values that built the countryside: patience, humility, persistence. But that world is fading. The children who once learned to measure time by seasons now measure it by screens. They leave for college, for cities, for lives that promise more stability and less struggle. And when they leave, most never return. The fields that raised them become background scenery, a place to visit, not to belong. In the middle of the 20th century, over half of all rural children grew up on farms. Today, it's less than 2. Mechanization made their labor unnecessary, and the economy made their departure inevitable. Where once you needed 10 hands to harvest, now you need 1 machine and a bank loan. And so, a family that once produced 5 new farmers now produces 5 former ones. The reasons are painfully clear. Farming is grueling. The hours stretch endlessly, the margins shrink, and the reward, if it comes with debt. While their peers in cities build careers, buy homes, and take vacations, young farmers often struggle just to break even. The message is clear. Farming may build character, but it doesn't build a future. Parents know this too. The same fathers and mothers who spent their lives keeping the land alive now quietly discourage their children from following in their footsteps. "We worked so they wouldn't have to," one farmer in Kansas said. But I didn't realize that meant nobody would. In small towns, the absence is palpable. The high school football team folds because there aren't enough players. The prom queen leaves for college and never comes back. The coffee shop, where old men once told stories, now stands half empty on weekday mornings. Without young people, rural America is running out of tomorrow. There is a deeper wound beneath the economics, the loss of meaning. For generations, the land was indeed just property. It was identity. To inherit a farm was to inherit a legacy, a family name written in soil. Now, inheritance feels like burden. Land is valuable, but the life that comes with it feels impossible. Some children try to return, at least for a while. They come back with modern ideals, sustainability, organic methods, new markets, but the system swallows them whole. They face the same old barriers: access to credit, competition with industrial farms, endless bureaucracy. Idealism meets invoices, and most quietly leave again. The farm wins the battle for their hearts, but loses the war for their lives. Technology, too, has widened the gap. The internet shows a world of possibilities far beyond the county line. The same connection that could help farmers sell online also reminds their children of everything they were missing: nightlife, culture, opportunity. The pull of elsewhere is stronger than the roots of home, and so the cycle continues. Each generation sees fewer births, fewer returns, fewer reasons to stay. In the 1950s, a sad, typical farm family might have a table full of children and a field full of laughter. Now, it's not uncommon to find a single farmer managing thousands of acres alone, his children visiting on holidays, offering help but never commitment. The barns that once echoed with life are now storage sheds for machines. The family photos on the wall fade under layers of dust. The mailbox still bears the family name, but inside the letters are from banks and equipment dealers, not grandchildren. The silence of the countryside isn't just the absence of sound, it sells the absence of succession. Every farm that loses its children is a story cut short, a lineage broken by progress. The land continues to yield, but the family tree stops growing. And yet, even in this quiet abandonment, there is a strange kind of love that lingers. The children may never return, but they carry the land with them in their work ethic, their nostalgia, their unspoken guilt. Because leaving the farm doesn't mean forgetting it. It means living with the knowledge that you walked away from something sacred, something too heavy to carry, but too precious to leave behind. The land remains. The crops still rise and fall. But every empty farmhouse window is a reminder that progress in its relentless pursuit has taken more than livelihoods. It has taken lineage. And still, in the fading light of evening, the old farmers look to the horizon not for rain but for headlights, hoping that one day maybe one of their children will come back down that long dirt road. The invisible empire of landlords. A quiet transfer has begun. Corporations, investors, and billionaires buying farmland as safe assets. In 2023, over 40% of U.S. farmland was owned by landlords who never touched soil. Farming, once sacred, is now a portfolio item. Across the heartland, the ownership of America, the most vital resource, its soil, is changing hands in silence. There are no grand announcements, no sweeping political debates, just signatures, deeds, and digital transfers. 1,000 small sales adding up to a transformation so vast most of the nation hasn't even noticed. The farms are still there, the crops still grow, but the hands that own the land no longer touch it. The pattern began decades ago. As family farms folded under debt and consolidation, investors saw opportunity in the ruins. Farmland, they realized, doesn't crash like tech stocks or lose value overnight. It yields quietly, steadily, eternally. Land became the ultimate hedge, tangible, tax-friendly, and unbreakable. By the 21st century, farmland was no longer seen as the foundation of rural life. It was an asset class. Hedge funds, pension plans, and billionaires began buying up acres at a pace unseen since the frontier was settled. Names like TIAA, Cargill, and even Bill Gates appeared on county registries once filled with local families. What had once been heritage became holdings. The shift was subtle at first. A farmer nearing retirement would sell a parcel to pay off debt, planning to lease it back, then another and another. Soon, entire counties found that most of their acres were owned by absentee landlords, people who lived hundreds, even thousands of miles away. In some towns, the biggest landowners don't know the names of the roads that cross their property. This new empire is invisible. No castles, no flags, no armies, just lawyers, spreadsheets, and shell companies. Ownership is layered through trusts and corporations, so complex that even county officials struggle to trace who truly holds the deeds. It is feudalism in a suit and tie, only this time, the lords rule through contracts, not crowns. For the farmers who remain, this has changed everything. They no longer own the land they work. They rent it. They pay for the privilege of maintaining someone else's asset. Each season begins with a lease negotiation and ends with a rent check. Improvements, irrigation, soil restoration, new fencing often aren't worth the cost because the benefits flow upward, not homeward. This arrangement breeds a new kind of insecurity. A farmer can pour his life into the soil, only to have the lease revoked when a higher bidder comes along. Land once passed from father to son now passes from spreadsheet to spreadsheet. It is hard to love something, one Iowa farmer said, when it can leave you at the end of the season. And the investors? They see themselves as visionaries, securing the future of food, protecting assets from inflation, bringing efficiency to an outdated industry. But the efficiency they speak of often means fewer farmers, fewer families, fewer roots. What remains is a landscape optimized for yield and profit, not for life. The irony runs deep. For generations, farmers dreamed of owning their land outright of freedom from landlords and banks. Now, as that dream fades, the land is more valuable than ever, but to people who will never walk it. Fields become financial instruments. Soil becomes a number on a quarterly report. The earth itself becomes abstraction. Even rural communities feel the shift. When the profits leave the county, so does the vitality. Fewer local businesses survive. Schools shrink, hospitals close. The wealth extracted from the land flows not into barns or main streets, but into boardrooms and offshore accounts. The countryside becomes an economic colony, productive, but hollow. And yet, the farmers keep farming. Because what else can they do? The tractors still roll, the crops still rise, and the leases still get signed. To the outside world, it looks unchanged, but the ownership, the essence, the soul of the land has already moved elsewhere. The invisible empire grows acre by acre, unseen but unstoppable. In a nation that once prided itself on private ownership and independence, the soil beneath those ideals is quietly slipping away. The land no longer belongs to those who love it most, but to those who can afford it least. And still, every sunset over the fields looks the same golden, endless, forgiving. The earth doesn't care who owns it, but the people do. And when the last farmer becomes a tenant, when the land becomes just another investment, America may finally realize what it has sold. Automation and the last hand on the plow, AI-guided tractors, drones, and robotic harvesters promise to replace the labor once shared by communities. The field of tomorrow may need no farmer at all. But when machines inherit the land, what happens to the soul of rural America? In the early mornings of the modern Midwest, the fields still look the same: wide horizons, low mist, the first light catching on dew. But listen closer, and the sounds are different. No shouts, no rumbling of old engines, no laughter from a crew of workers hauling bales. Instead, there's only a hum, the sound of a satellite-guided tractor, moving without a driver, tracing perfect lines through the soil, guided not by instinct but by algorithms. The revolution that began with steel and horsepower has reached its logical conclusion: autonomy. Machines that once amplified human labor now replace it entirely. The modern farm is no longer a family operation, it has an interface. Farmers sit in climate-controlled cabs or office chairs, watching dashboards that translate weather, moisture, and soil data into decisions once made by intuition. It's efficient, precise, astonishing. One man can now do what 10 once did. Drones monitor crop health from the sky. Robots milk cows through the night. Sensors beneath the soil whisper data to cloud servers in real time. The yield rises, the waste falls, and the need for people disappears. For corporations, it is the dream of total optimization. For rural communities, it is the slow erasure of purpose. The farmhands who once earned a living tending fields are replaced by machines that never tire, never demand wages, never make mistakes. The family that once gathered for harvest now watches from the porch, waiting for machines to finish the work. To some, this is progress proof that humanity has conquered inefficiency. To others, it feels like betrayal. Farming was never just about food, it was about meaning, belonging, and shared struggle. Harvest used to be communal neighbors helping neighbors, children learning by doing, entire towns moving with the rhythm of the season. Now, that rhythm belongs to code. Even the relationship between man and machine has changed. The farmer once saw his tools as extensions of himself, a plow that responded to his strength, a tractor that roared with his determination. Today, as machines think for themselves, they don't just follow orders, they make them. Artificial intelligence decides when to sow, how deep, and how much. It doesn't consult experience, it consults data. And with each step forward, the farmer steps back. The skill that once defined him, reading clouds, judging soil by touch, knowing the land as moods is being overwritten by analytics. The wisdom of generations, passed from father to son, is slowly being replaced by updates from software companies headquartered hundreds of miles away. Automation was meant to free the farmer. Instead, it may free the land from the farmer. The ultimate irony of progress is that it perfects the system by removing the people who gave it life. Already, major agritech firms envision a future where farms operate entirely autonomously, fleets of driverless machines tending millions of acres, managed by technicians in distant offices. In their models, the human presence isn't necessary, only the capital to buy the equipment and the data to feed it. It's farming without farmers. And yet, something vital is lost in that equation. Machines can plant, water, and harvest, but they cannot care. They cannot walk a fence line after a storm, or feel the satisfaction of a good harvest earned through sweat and faith. They cannot understand that the land is not a system, it is a story. Some farmers fight back, adopting technology but refusing to surrender completely. They talk of balance, using machines to assist, not replace. The tractor is a tool, one farmer said, but it doesn't love the land. That's still my job. But for many, that balance is slipping away. Once the machines prove they can do it faster and cheaper, sentiment rarely wins. The economic reality is brutal. A fully automated farm requires enormous investment, only the wealthiest can afford it. As smaller farmers struggle to compete, the cycle of consolidation accelerates. Automation doesn't just replace labor, it concentrates power. A handful of tech-driven megafarms could one day feed entire nations, while millions of rural workers become obsolete. And when that day comes, what will remain of the small towns that once pulsed with harvest season? What happens to a culture built on labor when labor disappears? The fields of tomorrow will be immaculate, perfectly optimized rows stretching to the horizon, every seed placed by machine, every variable monitored by code. It will be efficient, unerring, and silent, because no matter how advanced the system becomes, a question lingers in the dust it leaves behind. If no human hand tends the land, does it still belong to us? Automation may feed the world, but it will also test the one thing machines can replicate: the connection between people and the earth. And when the last hand leaves the plow, the harvest may still come, but the soul of rural America will be the crop we never replant. The great rural hollowing hospitals close, schools consolidate, churches empty. Every lost farm takes a piece of the community with it. The rural collapse isn't loud, it's just slow. like rot beneath the paint. America.'s map still shows towns, but many exist only on paper. Drive through rural America today and you'll see the illusion of permanence. The signs still say, "Welcome to town." The water towers still bear proud names, and the main streets still stand brick, weathered, dignified. But look closer, and the truth reveals itself. Behind faded windows are empty stores. The post office opens 3 days a week. The diner, once the heart of conversation, now serves coffee to ghosts. This is the quiet undoing of a civilization built from the soil up. When the farms go, the towns follow, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a long exhale. What begins with a single foreclosure ripples outward, hollowing everything it once supported. The grocery store closes, then the school, then the clinic. The church that once overflowed on Sundays now seats 10. The community doesn't tar or explode, it evaporates. In the 1950s, nearly a third of Americans lived in rural areas. Today, it has barely 1 in 7. Many counties have lost more than half their population since the 1980s. Young people leave for cities chasing stability and opportunity. The old stay behind, tending to memories and land that no longer sustain them. What remains are small pockets of stubborn resilience, aging faces, quiet streets, and an unspoken understanding that no one else is coming. The erosion isn't just physical, it's psychological. The sense of purpose that once bound rural communities together has been replaced by an ache of irrelevance. The old pride of feeding the nation feels hollow when most food now comes from corporate farms and global supply chains. The rhythm of the seasons has been replaced by the monotony of survival. For those who remain, the question isn't whether their town will die, it's when. Every institution that once defined community life has been weakened. Rural hospitals, unable to compete with urban medical centers, shut down one by one. In the past decade alone, more than 150 rural hospitals have closed, leaving entire regions without emergency care. When a child falls ill or a tractor overturns, help can be hours away. Schools, once the pride of every county, now consolidate into distant regional centers. What was once a 5-minute bus ride becomes an hour-long commute. When the schools go, the families go. When the families go, the stores go. It is a chain reaction with no recovery plan. Even the churches, the last gathering places, the keepers of small-town faith, are fading. Congregations age. The pews grow emptier each year. In some places, 3 denominations now share one building because there aren't enough worshipers to justify more. Where sermons once united, silence now settles. It is easy to romanticize rural life, to imagine these communities as relics of simpler times. But for those who live there, simplicity has been replaced by scarcity of people, of money, of purpose. The loneliness is palpable. It is not that everyone left, one Kansas woman said. It is that no one came back. Yet, amid the decay, something human persists. Small acts of defiance, a volunteer fire department still answering calls, a local paper still printing once a week, neighbors plowing each other's driveways after a snowstorm. There is pride and endurance, even as the foundations crumble. But endurance is not the same as revival. The forces draining rural America are structural economic consolidation, automation, global trade, and they don't reverse easily. A new factory or wind farm may offer jobs, but they can restore what has been lost: the density of community, the intimacy of shared struggle, the sense that life and livelihood were intertwined. What is left are shells, towns that function just enough to be called towns, counties that exist on maps but not in memory. The lights still come on at night, but fewer windows glow. Cemeteries grow faster than neighborhoods. The American countryside, once the heart of national identity, is becoming its forgotten limb, still attached, but without circulation. And yet, in the midst of this hollowing, the land itself remains beautiful. The sunsets still paint the fields gold. The rivers still wind through valleys that remember better days. Nature waits patient, eternal, as if daring humanity to remember what it once promised here. The great rural hollowing is not just a story of loss. It's a mirror showing what happens when a society forgets that community, like soil, must be tended. Left untended, both crumble, both turn to dust. And still, the old towns hold on not because they believe the future will return, but because letting go would mean admitting it never will. The Walmart effect. Global supply chains changed everything. Where once farmers sold locally, now they compete with imports priced to the bone. A tomato from Mexico can cross the border cheaper than one grown next door. The logic of efficiency indifferent to humanity. It began innocently enough the pursuit of convenience. In the late 20th century, America's appetite shifted from local markets to megastores, from the handshake to the barcode. Chain retailers promised low prices, abundant choice, and 24-hour accessibility. It was progress, they said. But behind the fluorescent aisles and automatic doors, an invisible revolution was underway, one that would rewrite the economics of rural life. For generations, farmers sold directly to their neighbors. The relationship was personal, human. A farmer's reputation mattered as much as his produce. Markets weren't just places of trade, they were gatherings, exchanges of stories and trust. When the harvest was good, everyone shared in the abundance. When it was bad, the community bore it together. Then came the superstores, Walmart, Costco, Kroger, and their global equivalents. Their model was built on scale: buy cheap, sell cheaper, and move mountains of product. Food was no longer a local good, but a global commodity. The tomato grown in Iowa now competed not with the one from the next county, but with one picked in Mexico, packaged in Texas, and shipped across a continent by truck. To survive, farmers had two choices: grow massive or get out. Local co-ops dissolved under the pressure of volume-based contracts. Small dairies couldn't match the economies of scale demanded by national buyers. Family orchards, once a weekend destination, became unsustainable as supermarket chains demanded uniform size, perfect color, and year-round availability. Consumers cheered prices fell, and abundance appeared infinite, but the hidden costs were staggering. Every rollback price came at the expense of someone unseen: a farmer selling below cost, a laborer underpaid, a small-town grocer forced to shutter. The money that once circulated within rural economies now flowed outward, siphoned to corporate headquarters and global shareholders. The Walmart effect, economists call it, the phenomenon where a single giant can reshape entire economies simply by existing. And nowhere was the effect more profound than in agriculture. By setting the expectation of perpetual low prices, corporate buyers made small-scale farming economically irrational. Profit margins vanished. A system once rooted in diversity became one of monoculture and mass production. But the consequences weren't just financial, they were cultural. The small-town grocery store, the one that sponsored the local baseball team and extended credit when times were tough, disappeared. The butcher, the baker, the produce vendor, all replaced by faceless suppliers behind corporate logistics. With each closure, a piece of rural identity eroded. It has a cruel irony. The same global supply chains that made food cheaper also made rural life poorer. A gallon of milk might cost less, but so did the value of the community that produced it. Efficiency triumphed, but humanity lost. For farmers, survival meant adapting to a game they could never win. Some joined the system, signing long-term contracts with wholesalers, accepting razor-thin profits in exchange for volume. Others tried to resist turning to farmers markets, organic labels, and direct-to-consumer models. But the playing field was never level. How could a local grower compete with multinational logistics and subsidized imports? Meanwhile, the consumer grew disconnected from the source. Few think about where their food comes from or who made it possible. The grocery store became an illusion of abundance food appearing as if by magic, untouched by soil, seasons, or suffering. The story of how it got there was buried beneath price tags and packaging. Globalization, for all its promises, flattened the world, and with it, the meaning of local life. What once bound communities together through mutual dependence has been replaced by invisible supply lines stretching across oceans. We no longer know the hands that feed us. And yet, in corners of resistance, some farmers are trying to reclaim what was lost. They form cooperatives, sell directly to restaurants, and use the internet to bypass corporate intermediaries. It is a fragile rebellion, small, imperfect, but alive. Because beneath the spreadsheets and shipping manifests, a simple truth endures. Food is not just a product, it is a relationship. The Walmart effect has taught us that cheapness has a cost not paid at the register, but in the slow decay of the places and people that once sustained us. Every time we save $1 on groceries, we spend something far greater the independence, dignity, and humanity of the farmer. And still, the signs along the highway keep glowing everyday low prices. Beneath them, empty storefronts and silent fields whisper the real price, a world where everything is affordable, except meaning. The age of data, farmers, satellite analytics, crop insurance algorithms, yield optimization AI, the future belongs to those who own the data, not the dirt. Farmers now harvest numbers more than corn. But every bite collected tightens the grip of corporations over the men and women on the ground. In the fields of the 21st century, the new harvest glows not in golden rows of wheat, but in streams of information, data flowing from drones, sensors, and satellites into servers thousands of miles away. The modern farmer no longer relies on instinct or inherited wisdom. Instead, he watches screens, he studies dashboards, scrolls through metrics, and waits for the algorithm to tell him what his father once knew by feel. The digital revolution promised liberation precision, efficiency, predictability. Smart tractors, guided by GPS, plow straight lines to the inch. Drones scan for pests before they spread. Apps calculate when to irrigate, when to fertilize, when to sell. The farmer, we were told, would become a high-tech manager of nature, mastering complexity through code. But mastery came with a price. Every click, every scan, every byte of soil data became property not of the farmer, but of the corporations providing the technology. The same tools designed to empower became instruments of surveillance. The earth that once whispered its secrets to those who lived upon it now reports them to companies who've never set foot on it. Whoever controls the data, one agritech executive said, controls the food system. And they do. Today, the biggest players in agriculture, Monsanto Bayer, John Deere, Cargill, and Corteva R&T, just seed or equipment companies. They re-data empires. They know the yield of every acre, the moisture of every field, and the debts of nearly every farmer. They can predict, with eerie accuracy, who will make it through the next season and who will sell. It's a new kind of dependency. The farmer no longer borrows just from the bank, he borrows from the algorithm. His decisions are shaped by predictive models designed in boardrooms, trained on data he helped generate but doesn't doubt he owned. Even the seeds he plants and the soil he tends have become sources of metadata, the digital DNA of his livelihood, uploaded and monetized by others. To opt out is nearly impossible. Modern insurance programs, government subsidies, and crop buyers all demand precision data. Without it, farmers risk disqualification, inefficiency, or worse, invisibility. To survive in the new system, one must surrender to it. And so, the old relationship between farmer and land, direct, intimate, human, has been rewritten as a contract between farmer and corporation, mediated by screens. John Deere, once a company that sold machines, now sells software subscriptions. Their tractors come locked behind proprietary code. The farmer owns the hardware, but not the right to repair it. Every malfunction requires corporate approval, every upgrade another fee. The man who once fixed his own tools in the barn now needs permission to start his own tractor. Ownership, once sacred, has been digitized into license. For some, this new era feels like progress. With data, yields rise, waste falls, precision agriculture can reduce environmental impact, save water, and improve efficiency. But for many, it feels like submission, a slow erosion of autonomy beneath the weight of optimization. There's a quiet irony here. The same spirit of innovation that once defined farming, tinkering, experimenting, self-reliance has been absorbed into systems that discourage all three. The farmer has become a user in someone else's platform economy. And the further technology advances, the less room remains for the unpredictable, for the intuition that once defined survival. The age of data farmers is not without its prophets. Silicon Valley envisions fully autonomous farms, robotic ecosystems guided by AI and satellite feedback, capable of self-adjustment without human intervention. In their vision, the land becomes a living algorithm, responding to inputs and outputs in endless loops of efficiency. But there is a question that even the best algorithm can teach to answer. What happens to the farmer in a world that no longer needs him? The great irony of progress is that it always promises freedom and delivers control. In the digital age, farmers have become both producers and products. Their fields feed the world, and their data feeds the machine. And still, they wake before dawn, step into the cold, and check the soil with their hands, the oldest tool of all. Because even in an age ruled by data, there are truths the numbers can't capture. The smell of rain, the feel of a harvest earned, not calculated. But the balance is shifting fast. The soil is no longer the source of power, the server is. And every new bite harvested pulls one more thread from the fabric of independence that once defined rural America. The question now is no longer who feeds the world, but who owns the knowledge of how it's fed. The forgotten veterans of the land. They fought droughts, plagues, and debt, but their names are nowhere in history books. The farmer's struggle shaped America's character, yet in the national story, they've become background noise, forgotten warriors in a quiet economic war. Every nation builds its mythology around heroes, soldiers, inventors, explorers. But for America, the truest heroes never marched in parades or wore medals. They stood in fields at dawn, their boots caked in mud, their faces burned by sun and wind. Their battlefields were plowed rows and auction lots. Their weapons were perseverance and prayer. And though they fed the nation, their victories were rarely celebrated. The American farmer once stood at the center of national identity, the yeoman ideal praised by Jefferson, symbol of self-reliance and virtue. His work wasn't just economic, it was moral. To work the land was to be free, to live by one's labor, to depend on no master but the weather. The Republic was built on his back, and for more than a century, he believed it was his republic. But as the country industrialized, the farmer slowly became invisible. Factories replaced fields as symbols of progress. Steel replaced soil as the measure of strength. And as the economy moved to cities, the narrative moved with it. The farmer, once the foundation of democracy, was reduced to a nostalgic postcard, a background character in the story he built. His wars never ended. He fought droughts that turned his fields to dust. He fought pests and disease that consumed his crops. He fought markets that rose and fell like storms. And through it all, he fought time, the slow erosion of his way of life by machines, corporations, and policies written far from the land they governed. Unlike soldiers, these veterans never came home, because their home was the battlefield itself. Every generation inherited not medals or monuments, but mortgages. Every victory was temporary, every defeat deeply personal. When a crop failed, there was no bailout. When a bank foreclosed, there was no honor guard, only silence. And yet, the farmer endured. Through the Dust Bowl, he kept planting. Through the Great Depression, he kept working. When the world went to war, he fed armies and allies alike. His resilience fed empires. His sacrifice fed nations. But when the wars ended and the soldiers returned to ticker tape parades, the farmer returned to his field, unthanked, unseen, unremembered. The 20th century was his undoing. Industrial agriculture turned him from steward to subcontractor. The corporations took his markets, the banks took his land, and the government took his autonomy. He became a statistic in reports, a political talking point, a sepia-toned cliché used in commercials for tractors and beer. The country still invoked his image, but not his voice. There's a cruel irony in that. Every American meal is built on the labor of people the nation forgot. The food is cheap, but the cost in sweat, debt, and despair is staggering. Farmers work 16-hour days and die younger than most Americans. They face suicide rates twice the national average, often alone, without recognition or rest. These are the scars of a war fought without witnesses. Walk through the countryside today and you will find their memorials not marble statues, but weathered barns. Rusted equipment half swallowed by weeds, faded family names on mailboxes beside empty roads. Each one tells the same story. Someone fought here once and lost quietly. In towns that still survive, the elders remember. They speak of neighbors who never took vacations, who measured wealth not in money but in acres. They remember barn dances, harvest suppers, and the sound of tractors in the distance. Those memories are fading, replaced by digital noise and corporate logos. The people who grow the food have become faceless in the system that sells it. And yet, something of their spirit remains, in the stubbornness of small farmers who refuse to sell. In the young families returning to regenerative agriculture, defying the odds to rebuild what was lost. In the soil itself, still fertile, still forgiving, still whispering the stories of those who came before. The forgotten veterans of the land will never have monuments in Washington, their heroism one to be taught in schools or carved in stone. But every loaf of bread, every glass of milk, every meal on every table is their legacy. Their battles built the world we take for granted. And while their names may fade, the land remembers them the same land they fought for, lived for, and gave everything to protect. Because even when the world turned its back, they never turned theirs. They were the quiet soldiers of survival, and though their war is nearly over, their sacrifice still feeds us all. The soil that remembers soil holds memory, generations of footsteps, harvests, and heartbreaks. But industrial farming has stripped it bare, eroded its spirit as much as its nutrients. Scientists now warn, at this rate we may have only 60 harvests left before the earth itself gives out. For most of human history, the soil was sacred. Civilizations rose and fell depending on its health. The Nile floods of Egypt, the black earth of Ukraine, the prairies of America, all fed by invisible worlds beneath our feet. To touch soil was to touch time itself, a living record of everything that had grown, died, and decayed before us. But in the modern age, that ancient relationship has been broken. The earth that once gave endlessly has been mined, manipulated, and forgotten. Every handful of healthy soil contains more living organisms than there are people on the planet. Billions of microbes, fungi, and insects forming a vast, unseen civilization. Together, they transform death into life. They hold water like a sponge, capture carbon from the air, and give plants the strength to grow. Yet, in the pursuit of profit and yield, humanity has treated this miracle as a machine to be optimized, not respected. Industrial agriculture replaced stewardship with extraction. Decades of heavy tilling tore open the ground, exposing it to wind and rain. Chemical fertilizers replaced compost and crop rotation, feeding plants but starving the soil. Pesticides wiped out the pests and the pollinators. Over time, the ground that once pulsed with life turned pale and compacted like a scar. It still grows food, but it no longer thrives. The numbers are chilling. Since the dawn of the industrial era, the world has lost more than a third of its topsoil. In the American Midwest, once called the breadbasket of the world, erosion now removes soil 10 times faster than nature can rebuild it. What was once 6 feet of rich black earth is, in some places, less than 1. Farmers speak of it like veterans describing a war they've still fighting one. They losing inch by inch, acre by acre. And yet, this crisis is invisible. Crops still rise, supermarkets stay full. From the surface, everything looks fine. But beneath the roots, the soil is dying, losing its ability to hold water, to resist drought, to store nutrients. Scientists call it desertification. Farmers call it something simpler: exhaustion. It's a cruel irony. The more we demand from the soil, the less it can give. Each year, farmers apply more fertilizer to maintain yields, but each year, the returns diminish. The land becomes addicted, chemically dependent on nitrogen and phosphates. The moment the inputs stop, the system collapses. But the soil remembers. It remembers the forests that once stood here, the grasslands that protected it, the cycles of rest it used to know. And when it's pushed too far, it rebels through drought, floods, and dust storms. Nature as revenge is not dramatic, as patient. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s was only a preview, a warning ignored. Now, the same winds rise again, carrying the same message: respect the earth, or it will stop feeding you. Still, not all is lost. A quiet movement has begun: farmers, scientists, and dreamers working to heal the ground. They call it regenerative agriculture. Instead of breaking the soil, they protect it, planting cover crops, reducing tillage, reintroducing livestock, letting ecosystems recover their rhythm. The results are astonishing. Fields once considered barren now teem with life. Yields improve. Water returns. The soil breathes again. It is not just a technical fix, it is a philosophical one. To heal the soil, we must remember what it once meant to us. Not a resource, but a relative. The land does not belong to us. We belong to it. Every civilization that forgot that truth, from Mesopotamia to Rome, eventually crumbled into dust. Ours may be next. There is a quiet wisdom in the dirt, one that doesn't shout but whispers, if we choose to listen. Walk barefoot in a field, and you can still feel it, the pulse of something ancient, waiting to be remembered. The soil has seen everything: our triumphs, our greed, our neglect, and yet it remains patient, still offering life to those willing to learn from it. But time is running short. Scientists say we have 60 harvests left before the damage becomes irreversible. 60 years, a single lifetime. After that, the ground beneath us may no longer be fertile enough to feed the billions who depend on it. Humanity's greatest crisis isn't taught in the skies or the seas it sat under our feet. And still, every seed we plant carries a chance for redemption. The soil may forgive, but only if we remember that it too is alive. Because the earth never forgets it, only waits for us to remember what it means to care. The feminization of farming. As men leave or die young, more women take over farms, often inheriting impossible debts and outdated equipment. Their resilience keeps the system alive, but at immense emotional cost. In the silent dawns, they feed the nation, unseen and unpaid. At first glance, it looks like the same story, the same barns, the same fields, the same endless work. But look closer, and you will notice something changing. The face of the American farmer is no longer just a man in overalls. It has a woman in boots, shoulders squared, hands calloused, eyes tired but unyielding. The feminization of farming isn't at all a movement. It's a necessity, a quiet, often invisible revolution born out of survival. Across the country, as rural men die young from accidents, illness, or suicide, women are stepping in wives, widows, and daughters, inheriting both the land and the burden that comes with it. Today, nearly 1 in 3 U.S. farmers is a woman, the highest proportion in history. Many didn't choose this life. It chose them in the aftermath of loss. Their stories rarely make the headlines. They don't march or protest, they endure. They wake before dawn, check the weather, fix fences, and balance accounts. They do the work their fathers did, often with half the resources and none of the recognition. In towns where the old networks of male support have crumbled, they build new ones, informal alliances of widows, mothers, and daughters sharing labor, tools, and quiet encouragement. But behind that strength lies exhaustion. The emotional toll is immense. Many women farmers carry not just the weight of their farms, but the grief of the men who couldn't carry it any longer. They inherit the debts their husbands took on, the loans their fathers couldn't repay, the expectations of communities that still don't see them as real farmers. One Nebraska widow described it simply. "I lost my husband to the bank, then I lost the bank to myself. The work doesn't end when the sun goes down." After tending the fields, many tend to children, aging parents, or second jobs that keep the lights on. Their labor is endless, cyclical planting, harvesting, feeding, carrying much of it unpaid, unacknowledged, and unseen. Farming for them isn't a profession. It has inheritance, obligation, and identity all tangled together. Yet, in their resilience, there is transformation. Many of these women bring a different approach to the land, less conquest, more care. Studies show women farmers are more likely to adopt sustainable methods, crop rotation, regenerative practices, reduced chemical use. They think long-term, treating the soil not as a factory, but as a living partner. For them, survival is indeed just about yield, it's about renewal. And they innovate because they must. Lacking capital, they diversify, turning to farmers' markets, direct-to-consumer sales, artisanal goods, and agritourism. They blend tradition with entrepreneurship, rewriting the definition of what farming means in the 21st century. A woman who sells goat cheese at a local market might manage social media at night. Another might run a small CSA, community-supported agriculture, while homeschooling her children. These aren't just adaptations, they are acts of defiance in a system stacked against them. Still, the obstacles remain immense. Access to credit is harder for women, especially in regions where old banking networks are still run by men. Equipment is built for larger bodies, facilities lack childcare, and agricultural boards remain dominated by older male voices. Even the language of policy farmers and their wives betrays the blind spot of a nation that has indeed caught up to its own reality. Yet, despite it all, these women endure not out of romantic idealism, but because someone has to. They know the land, the seasons, the smell of the air before a storm. They understand that to abandon it would be to let generations of work turn to dust. Their love for the soil is practical, not poetic. It is born from survival, not sentimentality. And in that survival, there is quiet heroism. You will find it in the woman who repairs a tractor alone at midnight, in the one who drives 3 hours for parts because the local dealer closed years ago, in the one who stands at an auction buying back her family's land with trembling hands. These aren't just stories of endurance, they are stories of defiance against invisibility. Because while history may forget them, the soil will not. Every furrow, every harvest, every footprint bears their presence. They are the custodians of what remains not just of food, but of faith that something can still grow where so much has been lost. The feminization of farming isn't a headline at Essa Heartbeat. Quiet, constant, and sustaining. The women of the land at Dundee ask for recognition. They ask for a future. And as the sun rises over the empty fields their fathers once plowed, they shoulder the weight once more, feeding a nation that rarely stops to ask who is keeping it alive. Unseen, unpaid, and unyielding, they are the last defense against silence. The living proof that even in decline, the land still finds ways to endure. The immigrant backbone. Behind every modern harvest stands an invisible workforce migrants laboring in fields Americans no longer want to work. They pick, plant, and pack, often without rights or recognition. The hands that feed America often aren't American. At dawn, before the first light touches the fields, vans pull into dusty lots across California, Texas, and Florida. Dozens of workers step out, faces weathered, clothes faded, hands already scarred from years of labor. They are the quiet engine of American agriculture, a workforce that moves with the seasons, following the crops like migratory birds. From strawberries in California to apples in Washington, from corn in Iowa to citrus in Florida, they are everywhere and nowhere. These are the people who sustain the illusion of abundance, who make it possible for supermarkets to overflow with cheap produce, no matter the season. They bend in the heat that would send most of us indoors, working 12-hour days for wages that barely sustain them. They are paid by the box, by the bucket, by the pound. Every dollar they earn is a piece of fruit, a leaf of lettuce, a handful of beans. Most are immigrants, many undocumented, others on temporary agricultural visas like H-2A. They come from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Haiti, countries battered by poverty, climate disasters, and instability. For them, the promise of American fields isn't prosperity, but survival. They didn't come chasing dreams, they came fleeing the absence of them. And yet, for all their labor, they remain invisible in the nation they feed. No statues honor them. No speeches mention them. In political debates, they are statistics, not people spoken of as labor, as illegals, as costs. But they are the living spine of the agricultural machine. Without them, it collapses. In the 1940s, during World War II, America faced a labor shortage and turned to Mexico through the Bracero program, a temporary worker system that brought millions of Mexican men north to work the fields. They were promised fair pay and good conditions. They got exploitation, squalor, and broken promises. When the program ended, the need de nado pa aito. The workers stayed, and their children's children. The fields still demanded hands, and America still looked away. The paradox is cruel. Americans want cheap food, but not the sight of the people who make it possible. Migrant camps are hidden from highways, tucked behind orchards or beside irrigation canals. Workers live in cramped trailers, often without plumbing or air conditioning. Some sleep in their cars. Many have no health care, no legal protections, and no voice to protest. To speak up risks everything. Even now, in an era of smartphones and satellites, many agricultural laborers still work in conditions reminiscent of the 19th century. Pesticides coat their skin. Heat stroke kills them silently. Wage theft is rampant. In the nation that feeds the world, those who feed it often go hungry themselves. And yet, they endure because endurance is all they have. They send money home, support families thousands of miles away, and dream of returning one day. But most never do. The seasons blend into decades. The farms become their lives. The border, once a line they crossed, becomes a horizon they can never go back to. There is a bitter irony in it all. The American heartland, once defined by the independent family farmer, now depends on the most vulnerable workers, those with no ownership, no security, no recognition. They are the new tenant class of the soil, bound not by law but by necessity. Yet, amid the hardship, there is dignity. Watch them work, and you will see it, the quiet rhythm of motion, the unspoken pride in doing something essential. They know the land, better than most Americans ever will. They can read the weather in the wind, the health of a plant in its leaves, and their knowledge is ancient, inherited, intuitive. In recent years, a few have begun to claim their stories forming cooperatives, fighting for labor rights, demanding visibility. Documentaries and grassroots movements have tried to shine light on their struggles, but the attention fades quickly. The public prefers the myth of abundance to the reality of exploitation, and yet these workers persist, unthanked and unseen. When the nation sleeps, they harvest. When hurricanes hit, they rebuild. When pandemics shut everything down, they keep going, declared essential, yet treated as expendable. Every meal in America carries their fingerprints. Every strawberry, every almond, every ear of corn is a record of their labor, a quiet testament to a workforce that holds the country together while living on its margins. History will likely not remember their names, but the soil will. The land they work bears their sweat, their footsteps, their lives. They are the true heirs of the agricultural tradition, the ones who still live by the oldest code of all. You work, or you don't to eat. They may not own the land, but the land knows them. And long after the headlines move on, it will still whisper their names, the names of the invisible hands that fed a nation that never looked up to see them. The climate-reckoning floods, fires, and droughts now arrive like seasons. The land is rebelling. For the first time, farmers must adapt faster than the weather can change. Insurance One-T saved them, and no app can predict a storm that no one has seen before. Across the American plains, something ancient is shifting. The old rules, the patterns that guided planting and harvest for generations, no longer hold. The rain doesn't come when it used to. The winters bite harder, or not at all. Rivers flood fields that have never flooded before, and wildfires leap across cropland as if drawn by wind and memory. For the farmer, it feels less like bad luck and more like betrayal. The land they once trusted has turned unpredictable, as though it's tired of being tamed. This is the new reality of farming in the age of climate change, not a distant threat, but a daily siege. What used to be called natural disasters are now expected. The once-in-a-century flood comes every decade. The 100-year drought arrives twice in a lifetime. Crops fail not because of one bad year, but because the definition of a normal year no longer exists. Farmers are among the first to see it. They notice the subtle signs long before the rest of us, how the corn tassels too early, how the soil cracks too deep, how the air feels wrong. They do not need charts or climate models. They live inside the data. The seasons, once a rhythm they could trust, have become chaos and slow motion. In the Midwest, rivers have swallowed entire harvests. In California, wildfires have turned orchards into ash and melted irrigation systems into puddles of plastic. In the South, hurricanes carry salt water inland, poisoning the soil for years to come. In the Great Plains, drought has become so severe that some farmers now call it the new Dust Bowl. Only this time, it is not caused by poor farming practices, it is the planet itself running out of breath. Insurance companies call it uninsurable risk. Policies that once offered a safety net are being withdrawn or priced out of reach. Government aid arrives slowly. tangled in bureaucracy, often too late to matter. The farmers know this. There is no policy for a storm that floods your house, burns your crops, and dries your well all in the same year. Technology promised solutions, apps that predict rainfall, drones that monitor drought stress, satellites that forecast crop yield. But algorithms built on old weather data can comprehend a climate no one has seen before. The models fail because the world they describe no longer exists. "We used to trust the sky," one Iowa farmer said. "Now the sky lies. The consequences go far beyond economics. Climate change is eroding not just land, but identity. For farmers, the land isn't T, a workplace, it S, an inheritance, a living relationship passed down through generations. When it fails, it feels like losing a family member. The grief is quiet but immense, the kind that settles in your bones and doesn't tea leave. Some are adapting, turning to regenerative practices that rebuild soil, trap carbon, and retain water. Others diversify, planting crops once thought impossible in their regions. Vineyards rise in Vermont, citrus in Kentucky, wheat in the Dakotas, then not at all. The boundaries of agriculture, like the climate itself, are shifting, but adaptation has its limits. You can move a town or a culture or a cemetery when the land beneath them dries to dust. Meanwhile, the global system built on predictable abundance begins to wobble. Prices swing wildly. Shortages ripple through supply chains. What happens in one flooded valley in Iowa or one scorched county in California now echoes in grocery stores half a world away. The farmer S struggle becomes everyone S problem, whether we realize it or not. And yet, amid the despair, a strange clarity emerges. The farmer, long ignored, long exploited, becomes the frontline witness to humanity as reckoning with nature. They are not just casualties of climate change. They are prophets of its cost. When the soil cracks, when the crops burn, when the rain wants to stop it, it's not just a forecast. It's a message. The land is speaking, and it S saying what it S always said in its quiet, unforgiving way. You cannot take forever and expect nothing in return. For centuries, farmers have bent nature to their will. Now, nature bends back. The fields we thought we owned remind us that ownership is an illusion, that the earth will always have the final word. The climate reckoning has begun, and the first to feel its weight are the same people who've always carried civilization's hunger on their shoulders. The farmers stand beneath a sky they no longer trust, planting seeds in faith that the world might still deserve a harvest. And as the storms gather once again on the horizon, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. If the land fails, we all do. The rise of regenerative hope. Yet not all is lost. Across the country, small movements bloom. Regenerative farms rebuilding soil, reconnecting people to the earth. They plant not just crops, but meaning. The idea that maybe the old ways were outdated, just forgotten. After decades of extraction and decline, something unexpected is stirring in the ruins of industrial agriculture. It doesn't look like a revolution, not yet. It looks like small farms, small steps, small miracles. A rancher in Montana planting native grasses instead of corn. A family in Iowa turning from chemicals to compost. A community garden in Detroit growing food in the shadows of abandoned factories. The land, long abused, is beginning to breathe again. This movement has many names: regenerative agriculture, holistic grazing, agroecology, but they all point toward the same idea, that the earth doesn't need domination, it needs partnership. Instead of forcing the land to yield more, these farmers work with it, not against it. They rotate crops, plant cover species to hold the soil, bring livestock back into the cycle to fertilize naturally, and allow fields to rest as nature always intended. The results are profound. Within a few years, barren ground darkens again, full of organic matter. Worms return, birds return. Water, once lost to runoff, begins to sink back into the ground. The soil, once a casualty, becomes a living sponge, holding both life and memory. What industrial farming destroyed in decades, nature can heal in seasons if given the chance. It's not nostalgia. It's science rediscovering wisdom that never should have been lost. Modern technology now confirms what indigenous peoples and early farmers always knew, that soil is not inert matter, but a living ecosystem. Every root, every microorganism, every worm is part of a conversation that keeps the planet alive. Break that conversation and everything collapses. Restore it, and everything flourishes. Still, this movement faces an uphill battle. Regenerative farming is slower, riskier, and less profitable, at least by conventional measures. It demands patience in an impatient world. It requires faith in processes invisible to the naked eye. You can see soil health the way you see yield. Investors want numbers, not resilience. Governments still subsidize chemical fertilizers, not microbial ones. In many ways, these pioneers are swimming upstream against an entire system designed for short-term gain. And yet, they persist not out of idealism, but necessity. Many of them are farmers who watched the old way fail, who saw their land erode, their water dry, their crops weaken. They V-lived the cost of extraction, and they unwilling to pass that inheritance onto their children. We not saving the planet, one Texas rancher said. We just trying to stop killing it. The shift is spreading. In states like North Dakota, Kansas, and Oregon, farmers, cooperatives are forming around regenerative principles. They share knowledge, not competition. They measure success not in output, but in longevity and how much life their soil can hold. It is not charity, it's as self-preservation. Because those who live closest to the land know the truth first. If the soil dies, everything else is just waiting its turn. Regeneration isn't just ecological, it's emotional. It reawakens something in people that the industrial age buried: belonging. When you rebuild the land, you rebuild community. You remember that food is an product a relationship. You start to see the farm not as a factory, but as a family one that includes every creature, every root, every drop of rain. And that realization carries power. Some of these farmers now teach others, traveling the country to spread their methods. Workshops replace warehouses. Field days replace boardrooms. It has a quiet movement, grassroots in the truest sense, literally growing from the ground up. Even corporations have begun to take notice. Food companies, pressured by consumers and climate realities, are investing in regenerative supply chains. Skeptics see greenwashing. Optimists see opportunity. Perhaps both are true. But even the conversation marks a shift from extraction to restoration, from control to care. The beauty of regeneration is that it doesn't require perfection. It thrives in imperfection and trial and error, in small victories that ripple outward. Each restored acre becomes proof that the damage isn't final. That healing is possible, not just for the soil, but for us. In a world obsessed with efficiency, regenerative farming whispers an older truth, that what we nurture, nurtures us back. The hands rebuilding the earth are not just planting seeds, they are planting the idea that humanity can learn humility again. Across the fields of America, the first green shoots of this new philosophy rise quietly, defiantly, through the scars of the past. They are fragile, but real, the first signs that hope, like soil, can regenerate if given care, patience, and time. And maybe that's the lesson the land has been trying to teach us all along, that after centuries of taking, the most radical thing we can do is give back. the return of the homesteader. In the post-pandemic years, a quiet counterculture emerged. Urban professionals leaving cities to live off-grid. Some fail, others thrive, but all seek the same thing: purpose. A return to the tangible. In an era drowning in digital. It began as a whisper, a restless yearning born in the isolation of lockdowns. When offices closed and commutes disappeared, millions stared out their apartment windows and wondered what they were working for. The digital world, once thrilling, began to feel suffocating. Life had become a screen, one more spreadsheet, one more video call, one more notification. And in that sterile glow, a question began to form. What if I just left? And some did. They sold condos and moved into cabins. They traded Wi-Fi for wells, deadlines for daylight. They called it many things: homesteading, off-gridding, regenerative living, but underneath it all was the same quiet rebellion, a refusal to let life be mediated entirely through machines. In a sense, they were returning to something ancient. The first American homesteaders of the 1800s had fled crowded cities too, chasing land, freedom, and a self-sufficient life. Back then, it was about survival. Today, it's about meaning. The modern homesteader isn't escaping poverty. They re-escaping abundance. They retrading convenience for connection, stability for authenticity. It's a romantic vision, the dream of growing one's own food, raising animals, building by hand. Social media turned it into an aesthetic. Sunlight on sourdough, hands in soil, mason jars glinting in golden light. But beneath the filters lies something real, a growing disillusionment with a system that promised prosperity and delivered burnout. Many of these new homesteaders are former tech workers, teachers, or professionals who once thrived in the urban grind. Now, they learn to can tomatoes, fix fences, and tend goats, discovering in the process that self-reliance is harder than it looks. The soil is stubborn, the winters are long, and nature, stripped of sentiment, is not gentle. Failure is common. Gardens die, wells dry up, roofs leak. But for those who stay, something shifts. They begin to measure life differently, not in productivity metrics, but in seasons. They rediscover the satisfaction of tangible work, splitting wood, milking at dawn, seeing the direct results of their labor. I used to send emails all day, one homesteader said. Now I grow my dinner. It's harder, but it feels real. The irony is that this new way of living is older than civilization itself. For millennia, humans lived in rhythm with the land. The industrial age severed that bond. The digital age buried it. But somewhere deep in our DNA, the longing remains to touch, to grow, to build something that exists outside the cloud. Still, the homesteading movement is not without contradictions. Many rely on YouTube tutorials and social media followings to fund their simple lives. The same internet they fled becomes their lifeline, a place to sell handmade goods, share advice, and find community. They are both offline and online, rebels and influencers, unplugging with one hand and live streaming with the other. Yet, the paradox doesn't diminish the truth at its core. The return of the homesteader isn't about purity, it's about balance. It's an attempt to reclaim autonomy in a system that reduces individuals to consumers, to reintroduce slowness into a culture addicted to speed, to replace digital validation with the quiet satisfaction of growing something that doesn't need a like. This movement, though small, reflects a deeper shift in the human psyche, a recognition that progress without grounding is hollow. For centuries, we've measured advancement by what we've built up: skyscrapers, networks, economies. But the homesteader measures progress by what they've built within resilience, peace, and belonging. Communities are forming around this ethos. Cooperative farms, intentional villages, and land trusts are springing up across the country. People pool resources to share tools, seeds, and skills. They are rebuilding what the rural collapse erased, not with slogans or subsidies, but with presence. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of this new homesteading wave. It bridges the ancient and the modern, the digital and the physical, reminding us that technology and nature don't have to be enemies. They just have to remember who serves whom. For some, this life ends in disillusionment, the reality too harsh, the work too endless. But for others, it becomes salvation, a way to re-enter the world not as a consumer, but as a participant, to rediscover what humans once knew instinctively. That meaning grows best when planted in dirt. As the cities hum and the screens glow, somewhere in the hills, a small light flickers in a cabin window. Inside, a family sits by firelight, eating bread they made themselves, the silence broken only by laughter and wind. They are not running away from the future, they are reimagining it, 1 acre at a time. And as the world spins faster, their quiet experiment poses a radical question. What if the next revolution doesn't happen in Silicon Valley, but in the soil? The war for the future of food. Private equity firms are now betting on synthetic meat, lab-grown crops, and vertical farms. It is innovation, but also a quiet conquest. Who controls food, controls the world. The farmer's last frontier is into the soil, it is survival in a system that no longer needs him. Once, food was the simplest form of power. Whoever could grow it ruled. Empires rose from fertile valleys and fell when the soil turned to dust. But in the 21st century, that ancient truth has been rewritten. The new kings of agriculture don't wear overalls or touch dirt. They wear suits, hold patents, and work in glass towers lit by screens. The fields they command aren't measured in acres, but in data points. And the battle they rewaging is not over harvests, it is over ownership. This is the war for the future of food, a struggle not between nations, but between paradigms. On one side, centuries of human tradition, the farmer, the soil, the seed. On the other, laboratories, investors, and algorithms promising to feed the world more efficiently than nature ever could. At first glance, it looks like progress. Vertical farms rise in urban warehouses, crops stacked in glowing tiers fed by LED light and nutrient mist. Companies like AeroFarms and Plenty promise climate-proof agriculture, no pests, no droughts, no seasons. In sterile rooms, scientists grow meat without animals, milk without cows, and eggs without chickens. To their investors, this is revolution food detached from the fragility of the planet. But to those still working the land, it feels like something else. Displacement. The farmer, once the foundation of civilization, is being written out of its next chapter. Every breakthrough comes with a quiet subtraction. Lab-grown protein replaces ranchers. Drone-run hydroponics replace planters. Algorithms replace intuition. And when food no longer depends on farmers, what becomes of them? The motives aren't always malicious. Some of this innovation comes from necessity. Climate change, soil degradation, and population growth demand alternatives. The planet can sustain endless plowing and grazing. In that sense, vertical farms and synthetic foods may be part of the solution. But when Wall Street and Silicon Valley enter the equation, the question shifts from how can we feed everyone to how can we own everything we feed them. Already, the consolidation is staggering. The top 4 corporations control over 60 of global seed sales. 3 companies dominate the fertilizer market. Meat packing and grain distribution, same story. The illusion of diversity on supermarket shelves hides a chilling truth. Most of it comes from the same handful of conglomerates. And now, those same firms, alongside venture capital and tech giants, are moving upstream into the very creation of food itself. In glossy ads, it is framed as innovation. But beneath the marketing lies an ancient pattern: monopoly disguised as progress. Whoever owns the technology owns the future, and in this new order, farmers are no longer producers, but clients dependent on licenses and supply chains they don't control. It as the corporate plow, reborn in silicon. And yet, the seduction is undeniable. Lab-grown meat promises ethical consumption without slaughter. Vertical farms promise abundance without waste. For urban populations, it feels utopian, clean, efficient, green, but the price of convenience is disconnection. The further food drifts from soil and sun, the more we forget where it truly comes from. We risk turning nourishment into software versioned, monetized, and vulnerable to the same fragility that haunts every digital empire. This is a haunting irony here. Humanity spent 10,000 years learning to cultivate life. Now we were trying to recreate it in laboratories, not because we must, but because it is profitable. In the process, the farmer's centuries-old role as the bridge between humanity and nature is dissolving. What began as innovation has become erasure. Still, not all reject this new frontier. Some farmers are adapting, integrating renewable energy, precision robotics, and indoor systems into hybrid models that blend tradition with technology. They see potential, not apocalypse. The goal, they argue, is not to fight the future, but to ensure it remains human. The difference lies in intent, using technology with the land, not instead of it. But the stakes are monumental. In a world where food is coded, not cultivated, whoever controls the code controls civilization. Governments can collapse, currencies can fail, but hunger always obeys its masters. And in the age of algorithms, those masters are changing. The war for the future of food is not fought with armies, but with patents and pipelines, with mergers and algorithms. It is not fought in open fields, but behind locked laboratory doors, and the outcome will determine not just how we eat, but who we are. Because food has always been more than sustenance. It is memory, culture, connection. The story of human survival, written in the language of soil and seed. When we sever that connection entirely, we don't just lose farmers. We lose part of ourselves. Perhaps the future really will grow in glass towers and petri dishes. Perhaps it must. But if that day comes, we should remember the cost that beneath every perfect tomato grown under artificial light lies the ghost of a farmer who once grew it under the sun. And maybe, when the harvests of the future arrive clean, efficient, and owned by no one who has ever touched a plow, we'll finally understand that progress, without roots, can never truly feed us. The forgotten funeral. Every time a farm closes, it's a more than land changing hands. It is the death of a culture. Old barns collapse, family names fade from mailboxes, and the wind carries away the last traces of stories once told around kitchen tables. You can hear it if you stand still long enough, the silence that follows a farm's last breath. The hum of the tractor gone, the gravel road untraveled, the porch light, once left on for late returns from the fields, now dark. Across rural America, this quiet is spreading like fog, not sudden, but steady, as one farm after another disappears into history. It doesn't happen with ceremony. There's no procession, no eulogy. The death of a farm is paperwork, a foreclosure notice, an auction flyer, a sale recorded in the county clerk's office. A few trucks arrive one morning, strangers walk the property, and by sundown, generations of labor are reduced to numbers on a ledger. The soil stays, but the soul leaves. Every closure is a kind of funeral, one no one attends. The barns that once echoed with the sounds of machinery, laughter, and livestock now groan under their own weight. Paint peels, roofs sag. The wind whistles through cracks that weren't there last year. To the outsider, they were just relics, picturesque ruins of a bygone America. but to those who remember, each is a gravestone. When the land sells, the new owners rarely stay. Sometimes it has a neighboring agribusiness expanding its empire. Sometimes it has an investment fund looking for tax advantages. Either way, the human story that once animated that soil ends. The farmhouse becomes storage, the mailbox gets taken down, and the name Anderson, Martinez, Schmidt disappears from the county directory. In its place, a corporate logo, a number, a plot on a spreadsheet. The loss isn't just economic, it ad spiritual. A family farm was never just a business, it was a worldview. It taught patience, humility, and interdependence. It taught that you don't control nature, you work with it. It bound people to seasons, to weather, to each other. It wasn't a perfect, the labor was grueling, the margins razor thin, but it gave life rhythm and meaning. And as that rhythm fades, something deep within the national character fades with it. In small towns, the collapse radiates outward. When the farms close, the feed store shuts, the diner loses customers, the school consolidates, the church can keep its roof fixed. Each institution that once held the community together depends on the land around it, and when that land goes silent, so do they. What remains is a landscape of ghosts, half-empty main streets, shuttered gas stations, abandoned fairgrounds, places that once pulsed with harvest festivals and high school football, now echo only with the sound of wind through weeds. Ask the elders and they'll tell you. They remember when the town had 3 grocery stores, 2 hardware shops, a local bank. They remember dances in the Grange Hall, neighbors helping each other raise barns or dig wells. Back then, one old farmer says, "We didn't have much, but we had each other." Now, he pauses, looking out at the fields, and the land had us. The new generation doesn't inherit that bond not because they don't care, but because it no longer fits the world they've been handed. The future is digital, not agricultural. The young leave for cities, chasing opportunity that the soil can no longer promise. And when the last elder dies, so too does the memory, the unwritten history of who planted which trees, which storm nearly took the barn, which creek flooded in '79. Stories that no archive will ever record. There is an ache in these absences. You can feel it in the way the roads grow rougher, the way the sky seems larger over abandoned fields. The land doesn't forget, it keeps the footprints, the furrows, the echoes of names whispered across the generations. But memory, like topsoil, erodes when left untended. And what S left behind is not tragedy in the cinematic sense, it adds something quieter, heavier. In a world that celebrates innovation, no one throws parades for what vanishes. We mark progress by what we gain, not what we lose. But every new era comes with funerals we don to attend. The small farm, once the foundation of America as independence, is dying without witnesses. And perhaps that is the most haunting part, not that it is gone, but that we forgot to say goodbye. Somewhere, in a field now owned by a corporation, a child's initials carved into an old oak tree still remain. The tree stands, the carving fades, and the wind carries away the dust of another forgotten legacy. Because when a farm dies, the earth doesn't mourn, people do. And when the people stop mourning, that is, when a civilization forgets where its food and its soul truly came from. The quiet end of the American farmer. The farmer's decline won't come with headlines. It will come with silence, an absence we'll only notice when it's so too late. When the shelves stay full, but the world behind them has gone empty. Progress has a price, and this time, it asks the people who grew it. There will be no breaking news for the end of the American farmer, no front page story, no televised farewell. The fields will not vanish overnight. They'll just change hands quietly, shifting from people to corporations, from families to funds. The barns will still stand for a while, the tractors will still move, and the food will still appear in grocery aisles until one day we realize we don't know who grows it anymore. The The tragedy of the farmer-esque disappearance isn't sudden collapse, but gradual invisibility. It's already happening, a vanishing that hides behind abundance. The supermarkets glow brighter than ever, the prices stay low, and the illusion of plenty masks the reality that the heart of it all is hollowing out. The system no longer needs the farmer as it once did. The machine runs on scale, algorithms, and contracts. The human being has become redundant. For generations, farmers were the measure of the nation's strength, independent, resilient, tied to the land by calloused hands and deep faith. They were symbols of endurance, woven into the American myth like the stars into the flag. But myths fade, and the economy has no sentiment. The farmer's worth is no longer measured in stewardship or skill, but in efficiency, a metric that machines and multinationals now outperform with ease. Most Americans will never see it happen. They'll drive past endless fields and think everything looks the same. But look closer, and you'll see the difference. Fewer houses, fewer kids, more no trespassing signs. The tractors are driverless now. The fields are leased, not loved. And the only voices left are the hum of irrigation pumps and the whisper of wind through uninhabited land. This is how an era ends, not with crisis, but with convenience. We traded relationships for systems, and in doing so, forgot what those relationships were worth. The farmer who once knew his soil like a story, who could read the sky better than a forecast, who carried the wisdom of generations, now stands replaced by a contract, a satellite, an app. It's easy to dismiss this as progress, as the inevitable march of modernity. After all, isn't this how civilization evolves? But there is something irreplaceable about the human bond to land. It is not just about food production, it's about meaning. Farming wasn't merely a job, it was a covenant between people and nature, between toil and reward, between generations who believed that tending the earth was an act of faith in the future. And now, that covenant is breaking. The next generation isn't inheriting land, they're re-inheriting debt. The old farmhouses crumble while the cities swell. Rural America, once the nation's beating heart, now beats faintly, sustained by memory more than hope. When the last farmer leaves, no one will announce it, but the land will know. The soil will lie fallow, not for lack of fertility, but for lack of touch. Machines can plant and harvest, but they cannot care. They cannot pass down lessons over kitchen tables, or tell the stories of storms survived and crops lost. They can produce, but they cannot remember. And when memory is lost, culture follows. America's relationship with its land, the very foundation of its independence and identity, will slip quietly into abstraction. Food will come from somewhere, somehow, processed and packaged, sterilized and simplified, as if it were made, not grown. We'll still eat, we'll still live, but something ancient, something human will be gone. A century ago, 40 of Americans lived on farms. Today, it's less than 1. By 2050, that number may approach 0. Not because the land has failed, but because the people have been pushed out of it, priced out, bought out, burned out. And when it's gone, what replaces it? Cities that no longer remember where their food comes from, children who grow up believing that milk comes from factories and tomatoes from warehouses, a world that forgot the feel of soil in its hands. The quiet end of the American farmer won't come with collapse, but with indifference. It will come when the rest of us stop caring, when the distance between the eater and the earth grows too wide to cross. And when that day comes, we'll discover that we didn't just lose farmers. We lost a way of life, a rhythm, a wisdom, a relationship that once grounded us in something real. Because the truth is simple, and always has been. Civilizations don't die when their economies fail. They die when they forget who feeds them. And by the time we realize what we've lost, the silence over the fields will be all that remains, the sound of a story that ended without a witness.